Hi, so this is lesson 10, and in here I added some new functionality that would be we have checked like is a book read or not. It seems a lot like a to-do list. I don't know why I called it books to read. It doesn't matter. So we have this functionality right now. It stores another property in local storage called read, and that's how it works. You can, as you see, it goes from true to false. For that to work, this all code will be on lesson 10 branch on GitHub. The new things here are checkbox. Our checkbox accepts 3 props on change handler, checked, and ID. What I did else is I took the book list and I put this li from here in another component list item. That I did that because I need this list item to have a state of its own. So now list item has a state checked. First property, when the class is constructed, it takes the default value from the props. Then when handle change happens, it changes the state and it changes the book in the local storage with change book method. I didn't write it all real time because I thought it takes a lot of time to do this, and I thought I would focus only on tests. So I'm telling what I did, and other than that, we would go and see how to test all of this. And change books, what it does, it accepts prop. It means what property to change, what value to put it, and at what index you can find that book. So if we change the first book in property read, that would be at index 0, property would be read, and value would be true or false. And then it sets the item. So let's start testing by doing the test for the checkbox. For that, let's create the file itself, checkbox test.jsx. In here, we need our React from React, and we would need a bunch of things from React testing library. So what would that be? Well, let's start simple with first. The main thing we need is a render. React testing library. Let's start with the describe block checkbox. And first, let's just see that it renders without errors. Renders without errors. And for that, and let's not forget our after each. So everything would be clean. And that's a function from React testing library. Okay, so const component, and we would render the checkbox. It accepts a property ID, as I said, so we pass a 0. Let's say onChange would be an empty function that doesn't return anything, and checked would be true. Okay, that's is everything here correct? I don't. Something is wrong. Okay, this is wrong. Okay. Something with the theme was wrong, so I suspected a syntax error. Oh, we have an unexpected token, so I did mess up my syntax. Oh, okay. That's strange. Oh, it's our describe block. Silly me. And let's see if our checkbox rendered, and okay, it did render, it passed. Now we need to check one thing, checkbox onChange works. How do we do that? We know it accepts a property onChange handler, and what we have in jest is mock functions. It means we we might do something like this, handle change, and in this case it means we don't care about the implementation. We just care about that we want to spy on this function, whether it's called or not, or how many times it is called. We also can provide some fake implementation if we don't want to call the function itself. We might provide some alternative implementation that would work in our tests. In this case, just knowing that you use just.fn, that's a special function that it returns undefined. It doesn't return anything. We just can spy on it, and I'm going to show you how. So const component, let's render our component. In this case, to be able to click on that component, we would have to have a label. And that's how our list item actually works. So that's why we need an ID. So label HTML4 checkbox and ID, and our checkbox has this. Actually, that's probably not a very good idea. That could go out of sync. So let's do this. Let's do checkbox ID. And let's do checkbox. So now what you can do is this. And pass it an ID, and we wouldn't need this. We'll just call this props ID. Okay, so now that we have this, when we click on label, it has HTML4 property. It means that when we click on label, it would get triggered the onChange. So now let's write our component itself. Do that, let's wrap it in div. Let's have a label HTML4, let's call it checkbox. And now we would call it checkbox. It doesn't matter what we call it, checkbox. ID ID checkbox, and onChange would be our handle change. That's our just mock function, and checked. Let's say true. It doesn't matter right now. What we care about here is that onChange works. Do that. Let's fire event. Fire event click. Before it was fire event change for checkboxes, now it's fire event click because as I understood, it's how user interacts with checkbox. It clicks on it. So, okay. And we click on component, and let's get it by label. By label text checkbox. And now we would expect our handle change to have been called. We can either do it to have been called to make sure that it has been called, or we can make to have been called times to make sure that it was called exactly one time. Let's put a 2 here so I could see that my test failed at least once. So is it? And I would see, but it was called one time. Yeah, you can see expected mock function to have been called 2 times, but it was called 1 time. So let's fix that because I actually did expect it to be called 1 times. So now you might ask, why don't we check that if checked value changed? Well, we're not going to do that here because I don't actually care about that. It's a controlled component, so the burden on whether it's changed the check property or not on whoever uses that component and whoever provides handle change onto it. In our case, that would be list item inside of books list. So that's what we're going to test. We're going to test books list, and I'm not going to test list item because I would care do more an integration test to see that it works as a whole. I don't really care to test list item in and of itself. So list item stays here, and also would add test to our data manager test. So now that we have our checkbox test, let's go to the data manager test. And in our data manager, what we need is, first of all, we need to put this in describe block because of Because when we do this, data add manager add, so it stays in local storage. So you have another test and it would stay in local storage. So our tests would be kind of dependent on each other. And I think I've said it in another video. That's not good. Our tests should not depend on each other. So data manager, my describe blocks are not so descriptive, but that's a problem for another time. After each we would do this. Local storage, set item, books, JSON stringify, empty array, so that we know that after each test, our local storage is empty and our test can work independently of each other. One more thing is we need to add this and check by default. What it should do is our data manager, what it does now, I'm going to show you. So data manager now, when it adds a name, it also adds a red false property. So we're going to test that in our test, red to be false. Let's see if we didn't break any tests. Okay, and they run and they're all good. Now another test would be is to change data manager changes a book. Okay. So we have our fat arrow function here. Let's call it again data manager, new data manager. Oops, not data queue. I don't know what that even is. And data manager add book. I don't know. Let's call it book. And now let's say expect data manager get books 0 red to be false. Okay. After that, let's call data manager change book. Do we have change book? Did I put it here? Yeah, I have it. Data manager change book. Strange that it has no suggestions. Does it have a suggestion for add? It does. That's weird. Okay. Oh, I call it manager. Okay, data manager. Okay, change book and property. So property is red, value is true, and the index is 0 because that's our first book. Its index would be 0. And now what we expected. Okay, now we expect it to be true. So here what we have here, we call data manager get books. We're getting books. We take the first item. We see that it has a red property to be false, and we see that and after we call change book, we see that it has a red property to be true. And let's see if our tests all work. So yeah, our data manager test.js passed. And another thing that's left is to write an integration test for books list. And we also need to put it in describe block so we could clean up after each test, and we could also local storage set item books to be an empty array. Let's start with that. Describes books list after each. And since we have two functions here, so we would call cleanup as like this, and we would call local storage set item books JSON stringify empty array. Let's put all the tests back here, and let's write a new test that would be called a test clicking on a book marks it as red. So we have our callback here. How do we start? Okay, we're going to start basically exactly as here. Data manager, we're adding a book 1. And next, let's have a component. Actually, that we can copy too. What's next? Let's fire event. Fire event, click component get by label text and get by label text. So our label would be book 1 because our label is the book name. After we've clicked on the book, what we expect? We expected that first value is false when we add a book. So after we clicked on it, what we should expect is that it is that the checked property on the checkbox is true. To do that, we're accessing by label text again, by label text, book 1. It should have checked property on it. And we're going to make assertion that it is true. Okay, we clicked on a component and we see that its checked value is true. Do our test pass? You can make it false to see that we actually made some changes, that nothing is wrong and the tests are working. Yeah, so it expected false and received true, and true it should have received. Other than that, what you can check here is you have data manager. So while we're here, we can also make the same assertion that after you clicked on it, that the data manager also changed its value. So red to be true. And what you can do, you can let's see if this passed. Okay, it does pass. And another thing you can do is you can click on it again, and you can take this and take this, save it, and now we should get an error that it expected to get false. Okay, it expected true, received false, and that's correct. After second click, it should be false. Okay, now all of our tests should pass. So this is it. If you want, you can test list item yourself. I'm not going to test it. I feel pretty comfortable testing just books list. And I know that this works now. So yeah. And I refresh, so it gets value from the local storage. So yeah, this is it for this lesson, and yeah, I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.